Okay, so end of the year, review of the year. Good. Oh, am I recording? I'm recording. Right. Hello and welcome to Catholic. What are we? What are we on? Are we on 13?
Is it?
No, it's 12. Is it, Gavin?
Well, it's not 13 because we haven't. I'd know if it was 12 or 13.
Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted 12 or 13.
I can look it up for you.
12. It's 12.
Is
12.
it?
There we go. There we go.
Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted episode 12. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Gavin Ashenden.
Well, we draw towards the end of a momentous year, and we thought, since it's the year that the Queen has died, that it might be a good chance to look back over the year and perhaps look at the I don't know what. Gavin, can you just introduce it?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much for trusting me with this particular job. Well, we're going to look at two things. The royal family has been in the news, but it's got some theological and spiritual associations that are really quite powerful. And one has to do with the Harry and Meghan and William and Kate axis, because it's not just a family feud. We all have families. We all have family feuds, sadly, but it's one kind of moral code against another. And as it happens with Harry about to release his book, it's Harry and Meghan pretending virtue but practicing vice. So they're pretending love but they're practicing hate. They're pretending integrity but they're practicing revenge. And apart from praying for them, it needs to be well, I say it, people know what it is. I say it doesn't need to be called out, but we need to remember that in this particular case that William and Kate are living out duty and forgiveness and turning the other cheek, and it's very powerful. But we might go on from there to look at what happens with the Queen gone and a new king has come, and the fact that we're at a watershed. There's a new constitutional order, and there are two problems we might talk about. One is the dreadful anti-Catholic oaths that the Charles has to swear, though he tells us he doesn't mean them. So what does it do to a monarchy when you promise oaths that you tell people you don't mean? He doesn't mean them because he wants to be a defender of faiths. He's made that clear. He's continuing with that, and so these oaths are they're a chimera. They're a pretend. I mean, it's also quite ludicrous. He's to swear to uphold Presbyterianism north of the border and Anglicanism and Episcopacy south of the border. It's a very weird thing for a monarchy to do, and it's all about pragmatism and not about integrity. So can you survive if you don't practice integrity? And then to look at the whether or not, as the Church of England garnishes the sort of the icing on the cake of the coronation, but actually is hemorrhaging on the ground and has no ethical or theological coherence. Anyone can believe what they want, and when it comes to wokery, they're going with the crowd, leaving a space for the Catholic Church. So we might talk about what it would take for the Catholic Church to live up to its history and its foundations and its integrity in this country, suddenly renew the possibility of being English and Catholic again. There's a synopsis of what I think we might want to talk about. But Catherine, back to you, Mrs. Bennett. You have written an article that you're very modest about, which is yet to be published, but is going to blow people away on Harry and Meghan. Why don't you tell us one or two of the observations you had up your sleeve?
Well, I was asked to write about Harry and Meghan, and I was a bit reluctant, partly because I haven't taken a huge interest in them and hadn't watched the documentary, but I then did. And, well, as you mentioned, it's not, in a sense, it's what they represent rather than who they are as people, because, of course, I don't know them. But it's about saying, how do we cope if we identify as victims? And in a sense, we're all victims. And so the answer is to look at the perfect victim, Christ. And as you say, love turns the other cheek. Love makes self-sacrifice for the good of others, whereas fear and hatred and anger cannot forgive and sacrifice others for self. So it was looking at that contrast through the lens of the story of Harry and Meghan and as you then mentioned, Kate and William. So that's the kind of theme of the article. And then saying in Advent, of course, now is a good time to say, what can we learn about a couple who seem to represent the spirit of the world, and the standard of the world rather than the standard of Christ, and how should we respond when we're faced with being hurt and pain, as they clearly are.
Tom Holland is about the only person I've heard for a long time to talk about the astonishment we ought to have about the victimhood of Christ being a motif for our whole civilization. Harry and Meghan would never use victimhood as a weapon if it wasn't for the fact that Christianity had implanted it as a holy and a virtuous idea right at the heart of civilization, because the victimhood of Jesus is the inspiration for turning the other cheek, for carrying other people's sins, for redeeming suffering with love. But what they've done is to, and what the whole left is doing, is to take this very blessed and beautiful vulnerability that the Romans and the Greeks and the Goths and the Visigoths, well, they became Aryans, didn't they? But Attila the Hun, all dealt in power, as did Nietzsche. So most of the world civilizations are dealt in power and would have scorned any society that suggested that victimhood was virtuous. But it's only Christianity that's done that. And then they've taken this very, very beautiful and transformative symbolism, and they've used it as a weapon to hit other people with. And the problem is they're not victims. They're not victims in any sense at all. They're very well resourced people who've decided that they weren't exercising enough power, and in order to mask the fact it was a power grab, they pretended to be victims. It's grabbing virtue and hiding the real moral issue. And I think one of the things I found most difficult this last year is the way in which the left have used the notion of hate speech, particularly to mask what's really going on. So in other words, anyone criticizing them, it's hate speech, but if they do it, it isn't. So it's this whole business of pretending, where dissembling about where moral virtue and vice lie. Actually, I think it's very close to the unforgivable sin. I think what Jesus meant by the unforgivable sin was deliberately misnomering evil and good. If you claim evil as your good, there is no repentance. You can't repent from that because there's nothing to repent of, and therefore you can't be forgiven. So I think actually that what's going on in the way in which virtue and vice are being deliberately disguised is very close to the unforgivable sin in terms of our metaphysical discernment.
Yeah, thank you.
I think it's what's interesting about it is how close it is to virtue. That sort of approach is it's not like a completely different new approach. It's taking what we recognize as virtuous and twisting it a little bit. And that to me is the smell of sulfur about any of these things, and you see it when you're talking about like the woke progressive agenda, that when they say things like love is love, and what they're doing is they're saying things that sound like they sound like truth, or there's an element of truth to it, and that it's just like the truth but twisted a little bit, isn't it? And the trouble is that people have found it difficult to articulate a proper intellectual response, and it's not difficult to do, and yet it hasn't been done. And that sort of sums up my concerns about the way we're seeing things change with the monarchy, and the Lady Hussey thing was a big part of that as well. The response to that, I think, has been a kind of a watershed moment for a lot of royalists who feel that that the palace has thrown Lady Hussey to the wolves in a pursuit of appeasing those wolves, with this sort of woke agenda. You see that a lot in society at the moment, don't you? I think, in terms of what we see over the course of the year, we've seen, and instead of standing up for what's valuable and what they should be standing up for, to conserve the traditions and the structures that form our society, instead of doing that, they're sort of trying to appease the people who are pushing against those structures. And where do we see that going? It only ever goes, there's only one trajectory, isn't it? And it's always, it never works, basically. And you see that in the Church of England, that they're desperately trying to appease, and in the Catholic Church, unfortunately, you know, the various Catholic school stories that we've been following. You know, you've got a desperate attempt to sort of say, oh, no, we don't disagree with what you're saying, you know, we love you and we want you to be, but instead of saying, no, that's wrong, it's harmful and it's dangerous for society. And I think it's that lack of courage in all these, that binds all these things together, that make it really problematic for us as a society as we move forward. And isn't that because all of these structures have lost power a little bit, Gavin, do you think?
Well, they've lost integrity, and without integrity, we'll collapse. I think what I found very difficult about the palace is that we know not to apologize to the left. It never does any good at all. They just demand more blood.
More.
And so there should be someone in the palace who, as they sat down, said, what do we do now? Do we sacrifice Lady Hussey, who's done, you know, she's a sweet old biddy who's done nothing but serve the state and the royal family and the body politic. It's a dreadful thing to do. And do we apologize to these people? There's a great deal to be, I'm not sure if we said it on Unscripted, but I've known a number of upper middle class women, grannies, and what they do is they fiddle with your buttons. It's a way of, they sort of reach out and touch you and paw you. It's a sort of way of making contact and saying, you know, you're one of us, and I'm feeling very granny-ish about you, and let me just fix your hair or your lapel or your button, or let me just pull this piece of spray away from your. I mean, that's what they do. It's a cultural thing, and I think what has really annoyed me is, here is our culture. We're allowed to be proud of our culture. We're allowed to be proud of the royal family. We're allowed to be proud of nice grannies who welcome people. And why should it be that people who've come to our culture recently, second, third generation immigrants, doesn't matter what generation they are, should refuse to acknowledge that there's a cultural lesson to be learned about us, and to accommodate, meet us halfway in the same way as we must meet them halfway, because we're generous hosts. They ought to meet us halfway too. But there's no sense that the palace value their own system by throwing Lady Hussey to the baying wolves. So it was wrong to apologize, wrong to give way, wrong to allow a piece of something that was clearly not racism. Did any of you see that lovely picture of her strutting on the arm of a wonderful black officer, guards officer? Yeah. You know, I was very proud of that. You could not be less racist than having a lady in waiting, so enjoying the company of a young, vivacious black guards officer. The idea that she's racist, or, you know, that she's got to 81 and her racism has never been explicit before somehow, you know, it's just so wrong and so ludicrous. And once again, it's this business of taking something that is perfectly good and pretending it's bad. This inability to distinguish between good and evil. And if we can't do that, we're really in trouble. And the problem is, these are our core institutions which define who we are. And if the royal family and the whole notion of royalty and monarchy feel that they have a legitimate place in our society, they have to stand up for themselves, or they delegitimize themselves.
Yeah, this is why when I wrote about Lady Hussey, I mentioned critical race theory. And there are some people who say, oh, not everything's critical race theory, but I think it matters, because that is what is at the root of a lot of this. And quite a few of the articles I've written recently, whether it's the fashion house scandal or the Lady Hussey affair, is exactly as Mark said. It's sort of aping what is good and what is beautiful, and it's close to it, but it's manipulative and twisted, and it's not true. But because it's close, I think it can sort of entrap Christians, and they're sort of brought and swept up in it. And I've had
everyone wants to be kind.
Because everyone wants to be kind and everyone wants to be nice. And I've had a few people saying, "Oh, I understand what you were saying, but poor lady, the poor woman, she hurt her feelings." I thought, I don't doubt that her feelings were hurt. Nobody's saying that her feelings weren't hurt, but the thing is,
I'm saying her feelings weren't hurt. I think
we don't know. They may have been hurt. Maybe her feelings were hurt. I'm in a sense, it it's not a national news story if her feelings were hurt, because I think my feelings were hurt at some point yesterday, and we all feel that way. But
it's a confusion. It's a confusion of good and evil. And I think when St. Paul talks about the gifts of the Spirit, and he lists them in various order, one of the most important ones is discernment, and it's one that I've prayed for from the moment I became a Christian, because it seems to me if you can't tell the difference between what is good and what is evil, then you can't really speak on behalf of the Lord or the gospel. You can't bring the gospel to bear with its searchlight of what it is on society. You need to match up what's good in society with what's good in the kingdom, and be able to say what is rotten in society, and also to see the perversions in the church as well. It's absolutely essential we should do this, but it's not just postmodernism which has made this impossible, but it's as if our society doesn't care about it. I mean, we've even got to the point now where, say, minor sexual attraction people, what we always knew as paedophilia, one of the grossest sins of all time, they're trying to push to make it sound as though it's good. I mean, I remember saying 5 years ago this was going to be the next stage of the progressive bandwagon, and people said, "Ooh, you're sick. How could you even think that?" And here it is in mainstream. It's really terrible, and the church is not calling it out, and that's really terrible.
And that's the danger of this masquerading as good, because you then try and make it untouchable. You sneak in what is not good and what is not true, but you mask it with this niceness and goodness, so that you make it exempt from criticism. And there's stuff there that needs to be criticized. It's not nice to call a paedophile a minor attracted person so as not to hurt their feelings. It's right to Matt Fradd's talked about this, to name things that we should be ashamed of, to name things that are wrong and speak plainly. And if we're so desperate to try and tiptoe around and not hurt anyone's feelings, what happens is we no longer understand that some things are just wrong, some things are bad, evil exists, and we have to be able to name it. So it's that masquerading is really the problem.
Well, this might be our bridge into sorry, Mark.
Well, I was just going to say, do you not think that the fact that the structures don't recognise this problem, that is how the rot is really setting into the foundation? So you could say, when you look at Her Majesty's funeral, you can see that there is a need and a desire in society. The way that it was supported gives us a window into the fact that these are things that we do value. We do value our culture as British people, as members of the United Kingdom, citizens, or what are we? We're subjects. There we go, got there. So, I think that the massive outpouring of genuine affection and grief that we saw shows that these are important things. And yet when the structures themselves fail to stand up and speak the truth in the face of these evils, instead they capitulate to them, even if it's only incrementally, that is a sign that that there's some serious rot setting in there. And you could say that, you could easily see that repeated in the Church of England and in the Catholic Church as well, where there's this constant capitulation to these like nice ideas or whatever, instead of a rigorous, instead of us standing up and giving a defense and a counterpoint and saying, no, that's dangerous and wrong. And I think it's really symptomatic of a direction that we're heading in that's going to cause us massive problems if we don't deal with it.
I'm sure that's true. And two of the things that really struck me in the last 48 hours we had to do with schools, which will take us back to Catherine's area of expertise. And so there was an evangelical Christian talking on GB News about the way in which he'd pulled his children out of a Church of England school because his 8-year-old was being read trans propaganda, where all the children were being told that doctors only guessed at the sex of a child when it was born. And it was for the children to decide whether they'd been born in the wrong body or not. And he said, I sent my child to the Church of England school because I thought, I believed, I trusted, I hoped that they were going to get some ethical teaching, but actually they're at the forefront of teaching what is in fact a madness. It's a gender dysphoria is a mental illness, which has now become legit. It's an anti-scientific mental illness, which has become being legitimized by teachers and taught in church schools.
If we can't call that out, something that obviously problematic, then what is the point of it? They might, the people might as well give up who are doing it.
Even Dr. Robert Winston, some months ago, maybe last year, was on Question Time. He was sort of tried to quiet him down. Don't say that. You can't say that. And you think this is a doctor who knows of what he speaks, and you're trying to silence him, because we're not. So the thing about the truth is, we've forgotten that everything must be relative to Christ. That's the center. So that's that's how we judge, isn't it? It's not, we don't fit Christ in around something else, around CRT, around feminism, around gender ideology, and where can we fit our faith in? It's everything must fit around Christ, and that's why everything's so confused. It's because we've lost that.
And you see the need for religion, in the woke agenda. You see the way that people are, they've adopted it in a religious fashion, and they're uncritical in their acceptance and the way that they are evangelizing. They can't even explain reasons for it. And that's, I think that, like Chesterton said, it's not that people won't believe in anything. It's not that they won't believe in nothing, they'll believe in anything. And I think that sort of is what we're seeing, that God's need, man's need for God. And because we've withdrawn from the truth, from the Christian truth, then there's sort of an acceptance of any old rubbish that comes along, be it BLM, or it's a way of attaching yourself to an ideology, that allows you to express that rectitude or religious zeal or adherence to a doctrine that makes you think that you're somehow superior, perhaps. I don't know. It's a dangerous, it's like I said to one of my boys today, it's like the worst kind of religion, isn't it? It's like a kind of zealousness that doesn't listen to any other point of view or consider anyone else's feelings. They just seem to shout obscenities at you.
I think one of the things we have to do is to name this new religion. If you think for a moment that this business in the Church of England school joins together the Bible and science. Science says there are two. Biology teaches there are two sexes. The Bible teaches that God made humanity as man and woman, and this other religion is beating them both. But what is this other religion? It's a mixture of victimhood and niceness. And so one of the reasons why the trans thing has got so much energy behind it is because they're the latest victims. I was born into my body in the wrong way. I can't help it. I'm a victim. And we have to be nice to victims all the time. And so this astonishing combination of victimhood niceness has managed to undermine both Christianity and even science, which gives an idea, really, I think, of how incredibly powerful it is. The other thing I saw in the week was something called School of Rock. I remember seeing a film a long time ago, the original film, and that's become a musical. And in Australia, a Catholic diocese put it on as one of its entertainment. It was a huge thing. It was put in an auditorium with thousands of actors and actresses, and some parents complained. But again, it was the Catholic Education Service geezer who pushed it and ran it. So it happened. And at the end of it, they said to the bishops, and to the education service, we're profoundly unhappy with the symbolism, the anarchic symbolism, the promotion of gay relationships as being the touchstone of amorous truthfulness and beauty. We're profoundly uncomfortable with this as Catholics. We want an apology that you've harnessed all the resources of the Catholic education system to promote this piece of artistry, which fundamentally undermines everything we believe in. And so, first of all, the bishops wouldn't apologize. And the apology that the head of the education service gave, or the man in charge of it, was perfunctory and cosmetic at the best. And there we are, we're stuck again. I mean, that's how far the rot has gone. We have to invite the Catholic laity to stand up and make a great deal of fuss. Bless the evangelical laity in Kent for standing up and saying, we want Church of England schools to be places where Christian virtues are challenged. I mean, and if only the people, if only parents and people would actually act out our beliefs, we could have some traction before it got too far. But because people aren't,
I think the time is coming, and I think it's all about efficacy. Like apathy rules, among Catholics, you know, in education, as far as my experience goes. And I think the large portion of that, of the way that that attitude is developed, is because people don't see what the point of it is anymore. And if this is facilitated to the point where it really starts to take over and grabs hold, they're going to figure out pretty quickly what the point of it is, what the efficacy of it is. And that, I'd love to dig down into that a little bit more with you guys. You know, like, how have we ended up here? It's like a mixture of relativism, isn't it? It's this idea that you know, you've spoken about it before, Catherine, that you're unique, everyone is special, all that matters is your feelings. It's like this, you don't belong to a community. It's all about, the only thing that matters is how everything affects you as an individual.
Yeah, man is the measure of all things. I mean, I think that the instinct for religion, as in for relationship with our creator, is there. It's in our nature. It's the sort of creature we are, and it's inevitable. So religion, if you look at it in that way, is a relationship that you can anchor yourself to in some way, is inevitable. Now, if you don't find that in a relationship with your creator, to whom you will return for, you know, this is why you exist, then you'll find it elsewhere. But wherever you find it, it does. The point is, it's answering a deep need in all of us. And so we saw that after George Floyd, where there was candles and pictures and kneeling, and so that instinct comes out somehow, and it's coming out, it's misdirected. So our task, I think, is to help redirect people to say the instinct isn't necessarily wrong, but it's wrongly directed, and there's nothing at the end of it. And
now, isn't that because we have stopped teaching the beauty and power and the unique nature of the Christian truth, and instead these things are perhaps more visceral, like an event like the George Floyd thing, and people can connect it to their lives in a very real way. And somehow, I mean, it's a perfect time to be talking about this stuff at Advent, isn't it? Where you get like this perfect sort of opportunity to really dive into the mystery of the incarnation and recognize the power going. You know, you're all, like, one of the themes of our discussions this year, I'd say, would be that the idea of immanence and transcendence. You know, and this is the time when that immanence really takes hold, isn't it? When the transcendent God that exists beyond time and space becomes a specific example of humanity born in a stable in Bethlehem and enters into time and space in a real and definitive way. It's such a powerful idea. Was it Irenaeus said that the flesh is the hinge of the incarnate of the faith? You know, that's everything relies on that, doesn't it?
I'm so proud to be part of a program where Irenaeus is quoted. One of the things I'd like to see is
badly.
One of the things I'd like to see is that the true spirit of Christmas celebrated, because it's always very interesting the way in which wokery, like a chess player, gets in front of you to kind of dig a hole for you to fall in. So the way wokery's done that is to talk about inclusiveness, but actually Jesus came to bring division. And the division between, well, light and darkness, between good and evil, between people who wanted to choose God and people who wanted to choose themselves, holiness and narcissism. The whole Christian episode is an exercise in distinction and division, in order that all that is good, true, beauty and lovely can be separated ultimately from the tares, from the opposite. And all this has happened because of the gift of freedom. What the gift of freedom has done theologically is to make moral virtue very difficult to see, because everybody claims moral virtue for their own actions, no matter how corrupt they are. There's that wonderful skit. Who's that pair? They play a couple of Nazis, and one of them says, "Are we the bad ones?" Because even that's right. Even the Nazis claimed to be good, which people forget. So Jesus, the Christmas, it's about division. If only the division between, start with the division between light and darkness, and then move on from there. We have to confront inclusivity as being a lie and a deliberate attempt to muddle morals, because they don't even mean it, because the first people they exclude are the Christians or anybody who criticizes them. So not only is it fallacious as an anti-Christian concept, but it's hypocritical and vacuous. But will we hear people talking about about how Jesus comes to bring proper division so we can see good from evil. I doubt it. It'll be much more the cuddly stuff, and that's the problem with this pseudo religion, the nice victimhood. It's about people taking moral labels and always choosing the easy way, the comfortable way, the self-serving way instead of the self-denying way, which is so difficult and what we're called to.
And what we need to be doing, I think, is echoing what Our Lady told Lucia at Fatima, isn't it? You know, like this is where the battle is going to be in the family. You know, and you can see how it's coalescing around these issues. And these are even if take religion out of it for a second, and like we, you know, if we go back to the royal family thing or the British culture thing that we, you know, if you talked about what actually it means to be British, surely it is family. You know, these are the values, aren't they? And you can see them being eroded. You can see, you know, fathers being taken out of the equation. Broken families rule, and again, we mustn't say anything because we want to be nice all the time. And ultimately, what's the result? The result is that the basic building blocks of our society are being eroded, and that will have an effect, you know. And so we should be standing up, I feel, especially at Advent, and saying, look, make your choice. You know, Deuteronomy 30, like, you know, Moses says then, choose life or choose death, and these are your choices. And as this stuff progresses in our society, I think that is becoming ever more clear, don't you think? And it starts off as a gentle capitulation, and it is a bit of a, you know, slippery slope argument, but all those things, relativism, utilitarianism, you know, I was watching an interview with Sam Harris, you know, one of the new atheists, one of your favorite new atheists, Catherine. And he, you know, claims himself claims to be an ethicist, and he was arguing, you know, from a utilitarian perspective, but basically saying we don't have to be honest with the electorate. It's fine to lie to people as long as we get our way. You know, it's sort of just extraordinary.
Might is right.
It's a swine ethic for sure. Yeah,
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
One of the things I hope we should pray for is ask our bishops to consider becoming more public about the virtues of the Catholic faith. You don't hear anything from the Anglican bishops now. Partly it's a managerial decision from Lambert, but partly also they can't speak on behalf of Anglicanism because there is no coherent ethical position for the coalition of spiritualities that makes up the Anglican Church. But with the Catechism and the Magisterium, Catholicism brings to the party, like no other organization, no other organism, no other philosophy, a clear, rigorous, historically tested, ethical articulation to the problems. And it would be, you know, and of course we get into trouble when we do this. We get into trouble over abortion. They're passing laws against us now. We get into trouble over contraception. We're being ridiculed for it. And yet we get into trouble with celibacy. But actually, who would have known that the 20th century would have brought a sexually addictive culture, to which, again, the Catholic Church is the only organization to institutionalize a response to the addiction of sex by insisting on celibacy. It took me, one of the things that moved me very speedily towards being a Catholic was when I moved from being embarrassed about celibacy, thinking, but buying into the whole Freudian repression thing, oh no, it'll all go wrong, to suddenly seeing that this was the only organization that was challenging the addiction upon which our whole economy is being run. Sex sells everything. So I think I'm very proud of the Catholic Church. I'm sorry I've discovered it so late, but I wish our bishops would be proud of it too. I wish that they would take advantage of their public platforms and speak out into the public space and say to a very hungry and confused and demoralized nation that's being completely bamboozled by a small percentage of activists, this is the truth, this is goodness, this is light, this is wholesome. Try this with us.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah. That's what, the more time I spend with my Protestant brothers and sisters, especially the Baptists, I'm having great, you know, really sort of fruitful conversations. But it becomes increasingly clear to me that the Catholic Church is the bulwark. You know, it is the place where the deposit of faith has been given to us. And it strikes me, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way at all, but that all the Protestant denominations are capitulating. They're embracing some form of moral relativism. You know, they've stepped away from Catholicism, and there are incremental incursions into that moral that bulwark. And that really interests me. That's notwithstanding the fact that, you know, I learn so much from my Christian friends, you know, and it's not taking anything away from that. Thank God for them. And I think I learn more about my faith. But like, I think that's really interesting. My experience has been that it just makes Catholicism more beautiful. You know, the more I learn, the more I see, the more experience I have of Christianity. And exactly as you say, you know, that's my fight, and has been for, you know, a long while now, is that I wish that I don't see a problem. I think perfectly perhaps explained when we talked about last week Archbishop Cordileone walking that line between love and truth, talking in San Francisco, and you juxtapose that with the message that came out of our bishops ad limina, which was just, honestly, you know, you'd think that if that's the best that Jesus has got to proclaim his good news to the world, that, you know, you think they'd never read anything about him. You think he never did anything interesting from what they've got to say. And that is a terrible sin, I think, you know, that it's like that.
Well, you've both jumped ahead before I had a chance to ask you, because I thought it would be lovely to end the year by asking you, what are the joys of being a Catholic for you? We've talked generally about the importance of Catholicism, the beauty of it, but on a personal level, we spend quite some time being rightly critical of some of the things we find in our culture. But to end the year, perhaps we could speak personally to how being a Catholic has changed our lives, has enriched our lives, has made our lives more beautiful and true, and why it's something that we should share with others. Mark?
Well, I think you two are a perfect example. Catholic friends, I'd say. You know, when you're a Catholic, you've got friends everywhere in the world. It's absolutely brilliant. And you can go and you'll find really close relationships very, very quickly. It doesn't matter where you go in the world, just because you've got that shared commitment to Christ through the Catholic faith. And my experience has been, you know, for everywhere you go, wherever you go in the world, you're welcomed as you feel part of a global community. And those friendships are really important and really deep ones. So that is absolutely fantastic. And the other thing I'd say is the intellectual integrity that, you know, is one of the things that I really think we do sort of try and highlight a little bit. And I think you're brilliant at, Catherine, and obviously Gavin brings his fantastic intellect to bear on it. And so hopefully everyone sees that there is that dialogue going on between us. And that's what I really enjoy, is the intellectual rigor and the fact that the faith, you know, it's like there's this sort of habit of apologizing for what we believe. But it's through studying the faith, you can really come to see how beautiful it is and how it affects and changes your life and other people's lives. And that's only ever for the better. If there's any negative things associated with the Catholic Church, then they are where there's a lot, you know, a wedge driven between the intellectual truth, the faith, it's the fides qua, isn't it? You know, the faith that's believed by the people. So I think that we need to talk about that more, and I wish that was explained a little bit more to lay people. So perhaps that will be our mission as we go forward a little bit.
Gavin?
Well, I've been becoming a Catholic for a long time, and one of the frustrations of trying to become a Catholic as an Anglican, because there's a fiction that you can be, was the experience, the horrible experience of pluralism in Anglicanism. And I'm not putting Anglicanism down. Anglicanism was a very interesting ecumenical experiment that produced some very beautiful things that might have worked, but it didn't. But one of the real frustrations was this insubstantial pluralism everywhere. So, for example, if you loved Our Lady, you had to be careful, because there'd be some people in the congregation who would have Puritan reflexes of, you know, you can't, you know, of Mariolatry. If you believed in the Mass, you'd have some people taking the Eucharist as if it was just a piece of bread. One of the things I found most interesting as an Anglican priest was the different faith with the faces of people as they received the sacrament. And I got terribly upset and worried when I saw on some people that they had no idea what they were receiving, and they were treating it as though it was this most precious and most wonderful event, as if it was. So that was an example of the pluralism. The fact that when it came to ethics, again, there was no one agreed on anything, and there was a kind of incoherence, almost an anarchy, which was very upsetting. And becoming a Catholic, well, it's just amazing to sing the Hail Mary at the end of a Mass, to turn around and acknowledge Our Lady in the physical representation someone's put up there, to know that the Mass is the Mass is the Mass is the Mass, and the miracle, this incredible miracle of transformation takes place every single time, to have the catechism, to have the ethics. Suddenly the ground is solid under my feet, and I just take a huge breath of gratitude at being home and being safe and being in a real church instead of an experimental wandering group of people who, however well-meaning they are, have no internal coherence at all. And therefore, without any internal coherence, all they can really, I mean, it's very important that everyone should say you need to be saved by the love of Jesus. That is the bedrock. But the problem is, the moment you go beyond that, if you can't continue any form of coherence, you can't welcome people into the church. So for me, it's this movement from insubstantial relativism into the substantial dependability of the faith that has been the same faith at all times and in all places since Jesus founded his church and gave it to the apostles, who gave it to the sub-apostolic era, and and so on and so on. So I'm still fizzing away with delight and joy at the privilege of having become a Catholic, and I'd like to share it with as many people as possible.
That's beautiful. For me, I think there's a real peace in just placing yourself under the mantle of Christ and his church, Our Lady. And I know that reading that is very unpopular today: wives, submit to your husbands, and husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. But there's, the children want to be in a home with both their parents. This is the natural state, and it's best. And we have that deep desire to be connected and to be under protection. And to be a Catholic is to know that you are that you have placed yourself into the body of Christ, that you receive communion, that you have, as Mark said, you're connected throughout the world with fellow Catholics who make up this body, but all under the head of Christ. And you cannot, there is peace and safety, and most of all, it's coherent. Everything falls into place. Everything makes sense. I feel like before I was a Catholic, before I at least not was a Catholic, because I was baptized a Catholic, but before I returned to my faith and came to understand it, I felt that I was angry, and we see this a lot in the world. I was so angry, and I would turn here and I would turn there, and a little bit of this made sense and a little bit of that made sense. But it's only since I've come into the church that I can sort of breathe out. I can exhale, I can relax my shoulders and trust and know, because I see it and I feel it and I experience it, that this is true and good and beautiful. And to place yourself under that mission, to place yourself under Christ and say, protect me, thank you for your love, continue to look after me and my family, is just beautiful. And through the sacraments, this is a daily thing. You can't, I went to confession just the other day before Christmas, and to walk out of those doors and just know that your sins are forgiven. You know it. You're not left wondering. I spoke to an ex-Calvinist recently, and he said, for all the talk of Calvinism, you're either in or you're out. You spend your whole life saying, I'm not sure. But you walk out and you just know you have that promise from the highest authority, and you begin again and you get up, and it's just so beautiful. And there is a peace there that won't be found anywhere else.
Happy Advent. Happy Advent. Happy Feast of the Nativity.
Happy Christmas. Yeah. Well, so as we draw to the end of 2022, we've got some developments for 2023, which we hope to share with you as the new year begins. But
Not
expect
least the mug.
expect to see expect to see more of these. But we will be back in a week or so. We're not quite sure yet, but we'll talk to you about some of those. And we thank you very much for sticking with us, for supporting us, for watching, for sharing, and ask that you continue to do so as we begin a new year. And most of all, we ask you for your prayers, and be assured that we pray for all of you before we begin each week.
Can I make a quick plea? I always used to laugh at Kevin Kelson on Anglican Unscripted when he began everyone with please like and share, and they were very concerned for their numbers. Actually, one of the things I'm grateful for are the people who leave comments. We read them all. It takes a while to get to them sometimes. But if you could think about whom this could be shared with amongst your friends, because if this clearly works evangelistically to some extent, and some people are very grateful for it. So as well as watching it, think if there's anyone you could send it to that you think after you've prayed might respond well to it. And that would be a very good way of spreading the influence of the church and this particular charism that we share with you. And thank you. Is it mugs? Again?
No, I just every opportunity. That's it. So that's it for the end of this year. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will be back as the new year begins. And have a happy Christmas, a peaceful Christmas. I'm Catherine Bennett.
Happy Christmas. I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Gavin Ashenden. Happy Christmas. Happy New Year. God bless you. Thank you. See you the other side, God willing.